generate new ideas in thinking, doing, and being as teachers. So the idea is to create resources for educators and teachers. All of this will be done through the website, which can be found by typing for real into Google. And the link is already in the chat. Dr. Sunny sent it earlier. And we would like to begin today's meeting with a land acknowledgement. Bishop's University is located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Abenaki. We acknowledge that we are settlers on this land and that we will continue to educate ourselves and work towards reparative actions. I invite anyone to share their land acknowledgement in the chat for their areas. So feel free to do that. And for this webinar, we welcome today's speaker, Wellysane, who will be speaking to us about doing it right, addressing classroom management from a culturally responsive perspective. Currently, she is a McGill University doctoral scholar based in Montreal. Her doctoral research investigates current teaching practices in culturally grounded schools in Indigenous communities in Canada, Peru, and Senegal to inform teacher education programs in Quebec. She's passionate about making teaching and learning a transformative experience for all members of the classroom, and Walisane particularly holds expertise in culturally responsive, relevant, and sustainable teaching approaches, and advocates for the implementation in all levels of learning. So we ask everyone to keep their mics off during the speaker's presentation, but feel free to write your questions through the chat. And after this presentation, we will take questions and ask that you raise your virtual hand. And as mentioned earlier, the meeting today will be recorded. So if anyone is uncomfortable with the recording, you can close your camera. But we'd love to see your faces for anyone who doesn't mind. The recording will be for the website, so it can be used as a resource. Yep. So listen,
Thank you so
if you're
much.
good.
Thank you for this presentation. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that the experience will just be so much better. So thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored to be presenting a little bit of what I know on classroom management and doing it from a culturally responsive perspective and approach. Um, we're all, either educators or work in the educational field in some capacity. And oftentimes, classroom management is very much a scary thing to even think about. It's something that we are so nervous to tackle for many, many, many different reasons. So hopefully, my presentation will not add any stress or just any sort of insecurity, but more so to give you more means to do even better in your classroom or to demystify a few things. So I will go ahead and start with my land acknowledgement. Technically not mine. My friend, dearest friend, Watseni Yosta Nelson, has given me permission to read this one in particular because that's the one that she likes. So we respectfully acknowledge that we are currently on the traditional lands of numerous indigenous Métis and Inuit communities. We recognize that this land we call Turtle Island, also known as North America, has been cared for by these indigenous communities since before the arrival of settler peoples until today. We recognize that this presentation, although delivered online, is contextually offered on the traditional territory of the Guinea-Kahaga and the Abenaki. Always remaining critical of our positionality, we offer always our gratitude to Indigenous peoples for their care and teachings about Mother Earth and the territory we reside in today. So, just to give you a little bit of a run through of what I will be discussing, I'll start off with a very quick self introduction because I was very, very, very well introduced already. So, I won't linger on this too much. We're going to talk about kind of what is classroom management basically, like generically, and then we'll get into classroom management from a culturally responsive pedagogy, evidently going through kind of the definition of what it means to be culturally responsive in the classroom through practices, through theoretical frameworks, and so on. And I will finish with giving you some resources because I never like to leave empty handed. I always like to offer as much as I can for you to carry with you, hopefully for as long as possible. If I'm speaking a little too fast, definitely let me know. Please don't be scared to interrupt me. Um, okay, here we go. So, as you know, my name is Wellysane, pronounced kind of like Welly Sunday, but not really. So it's Wellysane. I am an educator. I specialize in culturally responsive ESL teaching and learning, and also doing my PhD at McGill University. As mentioned, I'm very much focused on figuring out what it is that culturally grounded schools are doing in indigenous communities in Senegal, in Ganastage, and in Peru to substantiate our teacher education programs here because we are such a multicultural and very, very diverse space. So surely there must be something that we can do better. And I'm looking to find that out. In terms of my background, I do hold a bachelor's degree in specialized translation, French English from Concordia, and I have my master's degree in teaching and learning with a focus on ESL from McGill. Um, my cultural background, knowledge, and expertise is something that I always bring to the table, whether it's when I teach, when I do presentations and conferences, because they inform everything that I share with you. Um, as Elder Hampton has written about, memory comes before knowledge. And without keeping that link together, there's always something that is going to be a little bit missing in what I'm trying to share with you. I will be relating. So I'm French West African, and I've lived in Anglophone countries across the African continent, but going to French schools though. So what I bring to the table is also kind of that experience as a minoritized person with marginalizing identity markers who has gone through, the French system, but in an Anglophone space, but in an African space. So I'm hoping that this will kind of color a little bit what I will share with you today. So what is classroom management? What is this big bad wolf that we have to confront all the time the moment we set into our classroom? One of the basic, is there are many definitions of classroom management, can be, quote, the actions teachers take to create an environment that supports and facilitates both academic and social emotional learning. Kind of basic, kind of generic. It makes sense, right? But there are different types of or schools of thoughts when it comes to classroom management, because it's important to understand that when we speak of classroom management, we're not only speaking of like discipline, which is usually the public assumption and perception of what classroom management is. So Martin and authors propose five in total. Teacher emotions and classroom management. So kind of more focused on emotional management, managing the self. A second one is a relational perspective of classroom management. So this is where we'll see a lot of caring and authority, kind of like that duality of both, and through which we'll see a significantly high degree of teacher authority and care, both demonstrated at the same time. Kind of interesting to look into, but not for today. The third one is temperament based classroom management. So this is focused more on knowledge and management of student temperament. It's very reactive. The fourth one, which is what we will focus on
Décidé
today,
d'écouter
is
une formation en ligne d'une heure pour avoir du temps supplémentaire pour notre voyage. C'est ça
oh,
que je-
sorry. I think someone's mic is on. I thought it was a question. So we will focus on developmental and culturally responsive classroom management, which focuses on managing behavior and instruction from a culturally responsive and developmentally appropriate manner. So we'll look into this very, very soon, but this is based in a belief system regarding child development and cultural responsiveness together. And lastly, there's also classroom management as defined from a participation-centered perspective, which is rooted in ritualizing routines and practices that define a classroom community. And so it's all about managing the classroom in a way in which students feel like they are part of that membership, that community. Also very interesting, but not the focus of the day. So when it comes to the specifics of developmental and culturally responsive classroom management, Martin and others basically affirm that it's all based in teachers' perceptions of their students. That's basically what it is. And so when we talk about perceptions, we're including in there personality, developmental stages, cultural backgrounds, and all of this together shape instructional approaches and classroom management decisions. So in this way, when we're thinking about creating this high quality learning environment, it boils down to how well the teacher is able to adjust their behavior in response to all of these, to their students' individual characteristics. And by doing this, we are basically focusing in on two very, very, very important questions. First, what learning and behavioral expectations are appropriate for a child of X age? Kind of a good question to keep in mind, but we can go further. The second one is, to what degree should I, as the educator, take into account students' individual characteristics, such as cultural backgrounds, economic, socioeconomic status, exceptionalities, and so on and so forth? So how much should I take this into account when I'm planning instructions or when I'm managing behavior, right? Because as we know, there are certain strategies that are effective for one student or for one age group or for one group of students from a cultural background, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's unilateral, right? It's not always suitable for everyone. Um, it might even, in some cases, be demeaning to certain specific groups, right? So, keeping all of this in mind, I want us to discuss a little bit the two very crucial components of classroom management um, as defined within culturally responsive management, right? Very important to keep that in mind. This is our framework. So, let's first start with instruction management, IM. So instruction management really is kind of the process through which we, develop our classroom's educational goals. We develop our teaching strategies. So we're kind of looking at what the work is going to look like, the routines, using different instructional methods. Are we lecturing? Are we doing more of interactive approaches and group work? And all of this kind of will set the tone for the overall classroom atmosphere, but then also the classroom management. I'll get to that in a second. So basically, when we're thinking about instructional management, we're thinking about, okay, I know that when, I am smooth and when I'm building momentum, things kind of go well. So let me see how I can do that in the best way possible so that our students meet, educational goals. The overall experience is fruitful and it's transformative and it's just great for everybody involved. Now, we also know that when we apply a little too much authority, when we are a little too goal oriented, things kind of tend to go a little bit left. Student participation goes down. It's just uh, not very conducive to a successful learning experience. So overall, kind of in that process of instruction management, we keep in mind that self-directed learning, encouraging discussion, and so on, and acknowledging the different perspectives and backgrounds are linked to better overall success, but also a greater teacher support for student independent. It just works overall better. And now with this together, we can start to think about behavioral management, which is kind of similar to what we understand discipline to be, but the difference is, yes, it involves the proactive strategy to prevent misbehavior, but it also includes the teacher's response to it. So in that capacity, we're thinking about setting clear rules, implementing a reward system, kind of all of the basic aspects of it that I'm sure you have been taught before. Because overall, what we're really looking at when it comes to behavioral management is creating an effective reward system and encouraging students' participation, so that we have a minimal like misbehavior overall and just a sustained, well-ordered classroom environment. So the two kind of go together, but we clearly see that a very important component of it is acknowledging student perspectives and background, just basically seeing the students, right? But why? Why does proactively acknowledging and understanding student perspectives and backgrounds matter? Why is it so important? In order to answer that question, fortunately or unfortunately, we do have to go back in time and think about how education has evolved and how student perspectives from, I guess, student understanding from an educator's perspective has evolved through time. So, as we know, education has been a means of oppression, right? Like we're talking about the colonial agenda. We've within it, there were doctrines such as diffusionism, which essentially conveyed the idea that like Western or European cultures were just naturally superior to the rest. And so therefore, the rest had to submit to that superiority and accept infantilization, epistemicide, genocide. What infantilization is essentially, and I'll say this in big quotation marks, dumbing down indigenous knowledge systems, ways of being, so on and so forth, reducing them really to nothing, stripping them of their use, of their value, of dignity, so on and so forth, and of their potential as well, just stripping it completely and rendering it completely dependent to the knowledge system that was to be installed instead. Epistemicide is similar. Epistemicide is the complete erasure of indigenous knowledge, and ways of being, and so on. And of course, we know that there was genocide committed in the name of education. So all of this was done for the installation of white, Eurocentric, and Western knowledge systems, understandings, and behaviors as the standard and the exclusive, the only thing that was acceptable. So now the repercussions of this in the classroom have been devastating, and we know this. We know about colonial schools, we know about residential schools, and I'm hoping that we also know about the perpetuation of these inequities despite quote unquote efforts. I'll give you an example. In the French system, they went from the kind of like idea of exclusivity, right? So you were considered to be educated and have proper education if you went to the French system. And if you went to the French system, then therefore you are French and you're the best and nothing else can compare. Then with kind of globalization, independence first and then globalization, things has changed a little bit where they shifted from exclusivity to universalism, which is, I'll explain it this way. You might be in a French school, let's say. I was in a French school. I am a Black student. I am French West African, right? But stepping foot into the school meant that I left my identity behind and became a French student. And that is it. Because the idea is that once you step foot into the French school, everyone shares the same identity. It's just universal. Now, there has been a little bit of inclusion under the name of la francophonie, la francisation, all of that. However, it never really worked the way that minoritized people would hope it would, because we were still excluded from the curriculum. We were still not taken into account during instruction, and definitely when it came to classroom management. And this is how schools once were built as, and now kind of still are, sites of violence. Sites where, as Shields expresses it, students do not feel safe, students are targeted. We're not talking about your regular bullying, but we're talking about at the hand of educators as well, whether because of appearance, so on and so forth. So there are repercussions of the maintenance of these kind of like diffusionist and imperial ideologies even today, right? It might seem like an exaggeration, but I promise it's not. I've taught at schools where Black students were just sent to detention, and for no reason. We would ask around and nobody ever really found a reason. So just to give you an example. Now, Bell Hooks has always talked about when we face a challenge, we can always turn to theory, right? So what are some leading theories that kind of prompt us to see things differently and to change course? First, I'll share with you critical race theory, which really kind of contends the dynamic, the clear dynamic between race, class, and power. So what that looks like in education is these identity markers, so race and class, inform the educator's teaching strategies, like we talked about, right? And the behaviors towards students. So therefore, it kind of creates some avenues for discrimination towards students with marginalized identities. Now, somewhat similarly, Black feminist thought contends that actually we should operate from an intersectional capacity. So taking into account race, class, but also gender, ability, sexual orientation, so on and so forth. Because all of these inform a student's, a person and a people and a student's experiences. So in education, all of these explain and can be explained by a teacher and institution's responsiveness to student identities as a whole. So it's the idea that as educators, we always interact with all of the intersectionalities that are held within our students, not just one or two at a time. When it comes to critical pedagogy, we will always cite Paulo Freire and Pedagogy of the Oppressed, the idea that students come with their own knowledge systems, and that has to be valid in the classroom. So we're stepping away from the idea that students are just kind of blank canvases that we just throw paint on and hope that they remember what we teach them. It's the acknowledgement that students are agents of their own success and their own learning, and that in the classroom, we are all learners together. So within that, there are some teaching paradigms such as radical pedagogy, engaging pedagogy, culturally responsive, relevant, and sustainable pedagogies. Now we're going to focus on culturally responsive pedagogy specifically. This was coined by the most amazing, the most outstanding Dr. Geneva Gay. The main sort of emphasis for critical pedagogy, aside from, again, acknowledging that students are agents of their own learning and everyone in the classroom is a learner and so on and so forth, it emphasizes on the importance of integrating students' cultural backgrounds, knowledge, performance styles as well, and experiences into the learning process. So into that instructional management that I was talking about, to make it more relevant and effective. So this promotes cultural competence on part of the educator, but also within the students, self-worth and an ethic of care. So in that capacity, we're not just being aware that our classroom is culturally diverse, but we're proactively responding to it. We're constantly engaging, we're constantly making sure that every single thing that we put together for every single class, it comes from a desire-based framework, which means from the idea that students have potential, again, their knowledge system is valid and worth it, and we can engage with it, and so on and so forth. And we design instruction with that. making sure that, again, always we tap into the students' engaging knowledge and strength because we believe in it, because we see it and we believe in it, and we challenge them to grow academically. So it's all kind of like a way forward, but not just from a performance perspective, but also from a, hey, you are a member of this classroom and you are a worthy member of society type of perspective. So there's that nuance there. And so with that, culturally responsive teaching is then transformational, right? And it's a developmental process. It requires ultimately teachers to address their own beliefs about culture and difference before implementing instructional strategies. So it really is kind of a work that is done intentionally. It has to be intentional. So next question might be, okay, who is a culturally responsive educator? What does this person look like? Well, a culturally responsive educator is someone who is social culturally conscious and who affirms, so not just becomes aware, but affirms students' diverse backgrounds, sees themselves as agents of change, and working to make schools more equitable. Because there's an understanding that schools, as Apple has written about extensively, schools perpetuate social inequities. They are basically a representation of the broader society in which they're built. So there must be that understanding, and there must be a focused and intentional inquiry into this, making sure that there are relevant topics that are addressed within the curriculum, encouraging students to critique the curriculum that exists, to overall promote critical thinking and broaden the students' perspectives. There has to be an understanding that students' identities and experiences, including race, class, gender, ability, cultural heritage, all of these profoundly influence their learning, their existence for sure, but also their learning. And so has to have a critical eye on how learning environments perpetuate these inequalities, right? And then lastly, we'll have also recognition that learning is a constructivist process. So students generate knowledge by building on prior experiences, but also that learning is a thing that is done together. It's not just reading a book and then getting it and moving on. We're learning with each other. I like to call it like this. We're learning with each other, from each other, and for the sake of each other. That's how I like to frame it. So this is what a culturally responsive educator would be doing. So now I've talked a little bit about what it means to see our students. We've talked about intersectionality, but what does it mean? Like, what does that actually look like? It looks like stepping away from being colorblind. George Day has written about the importance of kind of ripping the band-aid off and looking at difference and engaging with it and accepting it and empowering it, right? So in terms of practicality, we're talking about not just knowing your students' names and pronouns, but actually greeting them with it every day, every time they enter the class. Knowing the different intersecting aspects of their identities and how these intersections influence their experiences in school, academically and socially. How do these intersections influence their experience in the broader society? Because again, the school is a replica, right? And making a conscious effort to ensure representation and empowered agency for each of their intersecting identities in the classroom and in the curriculum. Do they see themselves literally, like physically in the classroom, on the walls, like in posters? Do they see their culture? Do they see their culture as well in the materials that we use, in the references that we make in class? Is there a representation? And then lastly, understanding that although they may belong to certain broader social and cultural community, their own experience within them, those communities, is always going to be singular. So not making the mistake that is done a lot of the times in multicultural classrooms to kind of assume that because a student comes from or belongs to a certain cultural community, then therefore we can just throw a blanket on it and hope that they enjoy the experience. Example, let's imagine next month is Black History Month. Let's assume that you have Black students in your classroom. A great way of doing it would be to allow them to kind of like also lead what they want Black History Month to look like. And in that case, you will see the diversity in the Black community, because they will speak for themselves, as opposed to simply, talk about Martin Luther King and call it a day. You see the difference? So just understanding that singularity within the cultural community, very, very, very important. So what does that mean when it comes to classroom management, right? Because we talked about basically teaching posture, but what does that look like for actual classroom management? Well, it means that we're going to step away when it comes to classroom management. We're stepping away from discipline towards contextualized and meaningful realignment. That's how I like to call it. So it all begins again with committing to know your students thoughtfully and intersectionally, and kind of shifting your perspective towards classroom membership. Like, we are a community. How do we make sure that we're all aligned in a way that makes sense for everyone involved, right? So before you teach, here are some things. First, check the biases and instruction assumptions that you may carry. So what are the belief systems that operate within you as it is? It's important that there is a lot of honesty in that process, because otherwise this will show up in the classroom and students might be at the receiving end of it. So it's important to be honest with ourselves about the belief systems that we carry, right? Because those belief systems, as I've mentioned earlier, are the ones that are going to dictate the instructional management and then the behavioral management. So we got to be really honest. Then, got to be critical about the curriculum of the course material that we were given. If we're not able to create it ourselves and it's given to us, can we gauge? Can we kind of read between the lines? Hear the words that are not spoken out loud, in the curriculum, in the course material. What is the hidden curriculum operating within? What are you really, or what are we really teaching our students here with this material, with this curriculum? Then being proactive and intentional about getting to know the students from day one. So I always, 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 always advise to create a student profile document. This is a document that you can create with very basic questions in it, but that are intentional. Because what are we trying to get to know about our students? We want to know their names, their pronouns. We want to know some fun facts about them. We want to know the things that they're passionate about. We want to know what their cultural background is. We want to know where they call home, why. We want to know, we want to know all of the things that we can then bring up in our content, in our curriculum, in our course material, so that there is representation, so that learning is relevant, and so on and so forth. So it kind of all begins with your student profile document. We can create a community contract with the students. This could be on day one, kind of like a chart, if you will, of what we're expecting from each other in terms of behavior. This could be helpful because it strengthens the idea of we are a community and we are coming up together with what works for us and what kind of the realignment would look like. And I highly encourage student participation on this because it also kind of builds accountability. It's very important for students to feel accountable when they are in the classroom, because that helps in deterring misbehavior. Because there is kind of like this understanding of care. Like, I am a member of this classroom community, and I am responsible and I am an agent, and I'm going to think twice a little bit about the misbehavior that I'm thinking of pursuing. Creating a community agenda or calendar with the students. This will be very helpful to make sure that cultural celebrations are not on set days, but that they are done throughout the year. So instead of celebrating Black culture just on Black History Month, it could be like a regular thing throughout the year. Or it could be that when you're getting to know your students, you come up with the calendar that represents the cultural diversity of your class. You may follow the government dates, but even then, when you're doing it together, it again like shows intention of representation, and students will probably like that process. And then it's all about incorporating the information you gain into your curriculum. So as you teach, keep checking those biases, those assumptions, and those practices. What belief systems are operating within you? What hidden curriculums are you feeding in your classroom? And keeping up with the intention about maintaining your classroom as a space of reciprocity, mutual exchange, discourse, and transformation. So some things to kind of like keep in the back of your pocket could be funds of knowledge and funds of identity. Those operate directly from what the students are passionate about, kind of like the aspects of their culture that they're engaging with and that they can teach you about. It's very fascinating. I'll talk about this in a second. Project-based learning and kind of keeping in mind teacher talk length. So adjusting, am I talking a little too much? Should I talk a little bit less? Just adjusting your blueprint in the classroom. And then as you manage, again with the biases, the assumptions, and the practices. So as, quote, misbehavior is happening in the classroom, what role do you believe you have in this space right now? How do you perceive your student or students in this moment right now? And in the reaction that you're going to have, what hidden curriculum are you feeding in that moment in your classroom? What are you showing your students? What do you want your students to take from this moment? Right? So it's important to be intentional about the decisions that you make and when you make them. Some things that I encourage you to think about is, how do you understand the situation at hand right now? What is the most fruitful, meaningful approach to resolving the situation for everyone involved? What do you want, again, your students to take from this moment? How does your intended, because intention and practice can sometimes be a little different. So how does your intended resolution reflect the classroom or community contract that you have built with your students? Is it aligned? Is it contradictory? Does it reflect the commitment that you have made to one another? Can we see the ethic of care that you have committed to implement in the decision that you've made, right? Is your intended resolution informed by an intersectional acknowledgement and understanding of your students? There's questions to keep in mind. So this is something that repeats itself every day, every semester, every year. It's continuous, it's developmental, it's just all the time. So obviously this is amazing for their students. They feel very cared for, they feel seen, the content is amazing, they feel represented, but what's in it for you, right? Well, here's a list. So you're developing a fruitful skill at reflexivity. You're becoming outstandingly reflexive. And by reflexive, I mean you have this ability to take a step back, analyze your actions, put them kind of next to some goals that you've had for yourself and for your classroom, and see whether or not it matches, suggest or think about readjustments so that you can be realigned and act accordingly, and then do it again and again and again. So by doing that, you're constantly honing your teaching practices. You are creating and refining an organic learning environment that is intentional and it is conducive for overall student success. You're developing better relationships with your students, because I promise you that when you see your students, they see you. I promise you, I guarantee to you. You might even develop unique handshakes for everybody. Okay? It's amazing. You develop a better understanding of the social structures and broader structures, especially as they affect your students. So now all of a sudden, you're not, quote unquote, just an English teacher, but you are an English teacher that understands what's going on in the school and then outside as well. And you are an agent of change for yourself and for your students. And lastly, you develop, with all of this, you develop a more holistic understanding and view of what it means to teach and also to learn, not just on par of your students, but for yourself as well, because you're becoming more and more every day of a holistic learner, right? So seems worth it to me. I don't know. You can tell me, but it seems worth it. Now, I'm happy to take questions, but just before I do that, I did want to share that I have prepped resources for you. It looks like a lot. I promise it's not. I know that academics do this thing where they just say that it's just a couple readings and it's not, but I promise it's useful. Okay. So I kind of separated them into three categories. So pedagogy through a critical lens. Here you'll have everything you need to know, the classics and the importance of facing difference head on. Then you have critical and equity-based pedagogies and practices, so culturally responsive pedagogy, a little bit more in depth. I even added Geneva Gay's practice possibilities, which are tips and tricks that you can apply tomorrow morning if you wanted to. Culturally relevant pedagogy, similar to responsive. There's also culturally sustainable pedagogy, but if I went on that route, we would never stop talking. Funds of knowledge, funds of identity that I have mentioned, and then some research on classroom management. I want to show you very quickly what that looks like, because I will add I'll put the link in the chat, but I wanted to go through it with you. So here we are. It's in the folder for REEAL, culturally responsive classroom management resources. And it's all kind of in the same setup than on the slide. So let's say, for instance, the classics, you'll have bell hooks, Freire, Eve Tuck. For critical equity-based pedagogies, you'll have everything that you need. So it's all there. And lastly, I super promise, I wanted to just show you the document practice possibilities, so that you know that I am not making it up when I'm saying that it really is something that you can try tomorrow. So the way that the document is set up is it's in sections. So if you want to look at maybe some cultural diversity and social justice films and videos, here they are. And it's a long list. And then you have songs, popular culture, social justice, and then you have authors of color of children and adolescents literature, perhaps if that's appropriate for your group. Classified, African American, Asian American. This is US based because Geneva Gay is US based. Some museums also kind of based in the US. And then you have practice possibilities themselves. I will let you look at that in your own time, but I promise this is something that you can apply tomorrow. And that's all for my slides, and happy to take any questions. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Welly.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your wonderful talk. And so we are open to questions and comments. Feel free to just open your mic and shout out.
Mhm.
Okay, so Monica has one here. I can read it out for you, okay?
Mhm.
I can't activate my mic, so a question here. A common practice is to collectively or democratically establish a set of classroom rules. I wonder how this classroom management best practice may not be compatible with cultural responsiveness, which may assume a homogeneous shared culture. I worry this practice may fail to, borrowing words from your slide, ensure representation and empower agency for all intersectional identities present in the classroom, particularly for identities present in the minority. In a minority, democracy tends to foreground the voice to the majority. In short, this webinar has given me cause to rethink that practice.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing this. Monica, this is a very good point that you're making, right? Because indeed, when we kind of go through these types of processes, the voice of the majority kind of like tends to be heard significantly more. In that case, what I would suggest is to have a first exercise in class, like that, but also ask students to do this on their own. So written, maybe if they're comfortable with writing, and then collecting the answers and building something that acknowledges what everyone has written, and really kind of emphasizing that this is anonymous. Maybe that could help, but allowing all students to have space and share what they would want to see in the classroom in a way that is less stressful for, I'm thinking about, the shy students, the introverted students, the students who come from a culture where speaking up in that capacity is actually perceived as very disrespectful. So kind of offering that option, I think, would be a wonderful middle ground. And if you still find that there are some students that you're not quite sure have shared how they feel, it's important to, again, acknowledge that in some cultures, interacting with the educator in that capacity is not acceptable at all. So there will be some warming up to be done. And you might not have an answer for that specific question on the first day of school, on the first week of school, but maybe a little bit later. And depending on what the input is, you might be able to incorporate it in the classroom in a way that is very smooth. So that's what I would suggest. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I saw Peligan Pascal. You have a question? Would you like to ask?
Well, hi. I don't mind asking it. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, you gave great ideas regarding student surveys. I don't know if the resource that was added is in response to my question.
No, it was just
Okay.
so I didn't forget.
Wonderful. Yeah, so I use student surveys to get to know my students better, but I think you named a few questions that go beyond the scope of the questions I used to ask in order to get to know our students better. So if you wouldn't mind sharing some of the examples you gave earlier,
Yeah.
if you remember.
Of
Thank
course. Some of the ones that come to mind are names and pronouns. Where are you from? Where do you live? But also, where do you call home and why? What are you passionate about? Can you give me examples? Why is this important to you? What is your cultural background? If that is a little too complex, you can break it down as, where are your parents from? What what are some cultural practices that you do at home and that you really, really, really like? What are some things that that your parents do and that you really admire or that you're curious about? What are the things that you want to learn in the class? What are the things that you're not comfortable talking about in the class? Just questions along those lines to kind of dig a little bit deeper than necessarily name, interests, languages, because those are the types of questions that you will be able to base your funds of knowledge and funds of identity on. Some of the activities, some of the content, even let's say you find out through the survey that your student is so passionate about uh, cinematography, let's say, um, then you can kind of like work with them and get them to teach part of the lesson. Share it with the class, something like that. That would be funds of identity. Funds of knowledge would be if you find out, let's say that one of your students' parents is hugely involved in agriculture or very passionate about it, or it runs in the family. This You could have a lesson on functional language, maybe as it pertains to agriculture or skills. You could have a lesson on the importance of, I don't know, being aware of agricultural manners, like how to be respectful of food, let's say, or how food is made. There's so many things that can come from just that one piece of information. And it also allows you to potentially perhaps work with the parents as well. That's what funds of knowledge is all about. So that's what I would say. Do I have a template to share? I do not. I'm sorry. I do not. I don't, because oftentimes I just start from scratch. Because every class is different, every group is different. So if I give you a template, literally the basic questions will be name and pronouns. Some of them might be, passions and things like that, but I unfortunately do not have a template. I am so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Well, thank you for your answer. I also really like the idea of creating a calendar in collaboration with our students. Which celebrations do you want us to celebrate or acknowledge in our class? So I think that's a beautiful idea that I will share with teachers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mimi, do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Thank you, Welly, for this presentation. It was very useful and very inspiring.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, the last resource you showed us that Gay put together with her very American-centric perspective, I
Yep.
wonder if some of us here today would like to get together and create a similar document, but with our Quebec-centric resources. I don't know if that's something somebody would be interested in doing. Maybe put it in the chat, or I don't know, yeah, how we could get that going, but I'd be happy to spearhead that with you if you're interested.
That'd be amazing.
That
Yeah.
is such a good idea. I can see that. So, Welly, you have resent the link. Yes, that was what I wanted to say, because earlier the link, it's linked to UDS and it will require
Yeah.
login. So thank you for sending the second link. So the second link works now. Thank you.
Superb.
Okay, so I can see Monica has another comment here. With older learners, I often conclude such surveys an open invitation in case students' experiences exceed my imagination. Feel free to mention anything else about yourself that you feel is important for me to know and that may affect your learning experiences in our class.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always good to also let students add what they feel they should add, especially if it falls outside of some of the questions that you have asked. Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that for sure.
Any questions or comments?
Yeah. I just had a comment that like I really like the student profile um document that you mentioned,
Mhm.
because we talk about it a lot, but I haven't had the chance to implement it yet. But could be something.
Yeah,
Thank you.
it's always very interesting to get that going at the start of the year. Um, Yeah, I do it every time. And you always kind of get a little surprised. You're like, oh, okay, cool. You know,
Mhm.
and sometimes too, when you ask about, what do you not want to learn about? What are the triggers? Please tell me. It gets extremely informative in that way, especially when we're starting off and we're not really sure our intention. Again, intention versus impact. Our intention is great, but then like we're not sure at what point we're actually overstepping. So
Mhm.
having students answer to what some of their triggers are is can be very, very, very important for sure.
Mhm. Bianca has a question.
Um, Also not a question, just a comment. I did the survey with my students during my fourth practicum at the beginning, and they like it's such a simple thing to do, but they really appreciated me actually getting to know them beyond an English student. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that. And I also really like the idea of the calendar. I never heard of that before, so I'll definitely think of implementing that.
Yeah, I definitely encourage you to do it, just because it allows, again, like students cultural background and inheritance to be like put on a map, and like they look forward to it. It's like, comes this month, we're gonna talk about that, and I'm so excited. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, it can be really awesome. And like you said, getting to know your students outside of, like we are in English class, extremely important. And sometimes it's just through the most basic questions. How are you? How's the week been? Seems a little busy. How are you feeling? How are you holding up? Tell me about the things. I do that with my students, whether they are high schoolers or university students. And for a few minutes we get to talking, and I also get to know kind of like what they're dealing with, which then also helps in my teaching strategies, but also my behavioral management. Because then if I know that certain students are especially stressed, then I know that the decisions I'm going to make if there is misbehavior are going to be, appropriate, because I would have known like, oh, actually, this student or this group of students is like actually really, really, really stressed. There's a lot on their plate right now. So let's see how we can work together to make at least the next 60 minutes a little bit nice. Because 9 times out of 10, it is not, it's never personal. Students are always
Mhm.
carrying something. They're always
Mhm.
carrying something in their bag. Um, so it's about recognizing that and paying attention and being proactive about it. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I really like how your talk shifted our focus from just behavior management to instructional management, because a
Mm.
lot of times this is a more proactive way of understanding students' needs and then incorporate it into our teaching,
Yeah.
and that saves a lot of time actually, and because the students feel that they're being heard and they're being understood.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. They're seen. They were
Mhm.
just seen. Sometimes that's all they need, really.
Awesome. So like it's almost 5 o'clock. We're a minute away, so we can wrap this presentation. Thank you so much for sharing with us. And thank you everyone for being here and participating. Just to know that the webinars alternate between the first Wednesday and Thursday of every month. You can make sure to check out the website for the full schedule. You can also leave your emails in the chat, and we can send an email about the next webinars and when this webinar will be uploaded on the website. And of course, if you have any more questions or curious about something, feel free to contact us through the For Real contact page on the website. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you. Look forward to seeing all of you in February.